Hi guys, and welcome to episode 6 of Moments in Time, season 3's Narvik extravaganza. As always, I've dragged Alina and Zane along with me.
Evening.
Evening.
Today we're moving away. Lena's going to be even more excited. We're moving pretty much further away from the sea. In fact, I think I only mentioned 2 ships in this one. It's a bit more land-based, and there's brutal murder as well. So
sounds good to me. Not the brutal murder, but the boaty things.
Yeah, we'll probably discuss it later, but there's a suspicion of war crimes, but we'll talk about that later. But just to catch everyone up in case you've missed a couple of episodes. In fact, don't have a catch up. Go just scroll down and listen to them. We'll wait. Or the main German body is currently advancing in Kampfgruppe size, sort of north from Oslo and the south, and they're heading up to try and get to Trondheim. Parts of the Norwegian army are trying to form some kind of defence. The British have landed 2 forces. You've got Hammer Force at Namsos, and then you've got Sickle Force landing at Andalsnes. The Germans are pushing up, or the Germans we're going to be looking at today, pushing up the Gudbrandsdal River Valley with the hope of smashing through all the Norwegian positions, getting to Trondheim. But the valley is handy for them because it means that they can't be flanked, but it also means that the Allies can put in blocks to try and stop them. The Norwegians put in a request for the British to send troops to help them do this, because if they think they can blunt the German blitzkrieg, then they'll be able to organise a proper offensive. And the first block is at Lilliehammer on the 21st of April. Men from the Leicestershire Regiment arrive at Lillehammer on that day, and they're assigned to the command under the command of the Norwegians. And the aptly named Lieutenant Colonel German is in charge of the British troops, and he deploys them across the main road south of Asmarken, and they dig in. They're still lacking transportation, and they don't have a lot of their heavy equipment. They're also territorial troops, so they're not seasoned regulars. They're not experienced, and they're about to face the sharp end of the German army. At around 3 p.m, the Norwegian forces who are with them withdraw, and they go straight through the British positions on their way to Kvam. They're followed by the Germans in the usual style, troops backed by Luftwaffe support. The British are struggling to hold them back, especially with the terrain and the really awful weather. They suffer quite significant losses. The Germans sort of do what they do best. They move in, isolate sections of British troops and bypass them and just cut them off. What's left of the British and Norwegian troops withdraw to the north side of the town near Bigbekamp, which is a mountain. The Germans, some of whom are actually carrying skis, unlike the French Alpine Squad troops, I keep coming back to that, and they outflank the British positions by the 23rd of April, and the 2 British battalions fall back again. They hadn't eaten or slept for 36 hours, and some of them didn't even have greatcoats. They were just in their standard combat jackets. So they're cold, wet, miserable, hungry, and tired. Not the best combination for fighting. There's also issues between the British and the Norwegians about communications to each other as to where each other's positions were and what they were doing and what was happening. And the whole thing just collapsed. But it gives them a chance to form another line slightly further north.
Yes, Chris, it does. So that brings us to Tretten, which is just above Lillehammer. I had to Google that, by the way, because you know me in geography, I'm not very good at it. But anyway, so instead of a valley, it now becomes a gorge at Tretten, and the Allies draw a new line more or less here. So on the 23rd of April at 1 p.m, the Germans attack with 3 tanks in the lead. The British held out until about 9:30 p.m. when they more or less retreated. The brigade is now numbering 9 officers and 300 men. So that's more or less a lot less than when we first started with. And anti-tank rifles have been used against the lighter German armour to some effect, but the Germans, they just keep coming. The British troops at this point, wouldn't you be demoralised? Because I definitely would. They're demoralised, decimated, they're completely excited and just glad to be getting back out there. But during the retreat and withdrawal, some units, they do become separated or they get captured and overtaken by the Germans. So one of the company commanders, Captain Beckworth, he manages to organise between about 17 to 18 men, and they spend the night in an abandoned house. The next morning, they attempt to push north to rejoin their forces, but the Germans at this point had already reached their rendezvous point. And the snow, we can just imagine how much snow has fallen at this point in Norway, a copious amount, even though we're looking at still being in April. it's still, if you go even go on Google Maps now, or look at the weather now, it's still pretty bad in April. So the snow further hampers their movements, and soon they're forced to surrender. Another force that also had to surrender was under John Shepherd, who recalled holding a wooden house against the German advance. He had been given orders to hold out until 6 p.m. and then reinforcements, they would have been sent up. His men managed to disable 7 German vehicles, but their Bren guns had been loaded with way too many tracer rounds, which gave away their position. And the Germans returned fire, killing the gunner, and 2 tanks then approached with their thicker front armour face on, so the anti-tank gun just couldn't penetrate the armour. The house was then set on fire, and they dragged out the wounded, only to find that they were surrounded by German infantry. John would later find out that there had been absolutely no intent of sending any reinforcements, and that his men had been used to buy time for the withdrawal of the rest of the force. Chris,
Yes.
read us this testimony that we're waiting on.
Yes, this is from one of the stretcher bearers who was assigned to the units there, and he described the fighting as, once the fighting started, we could actually see our comrades dropping, which we all felt was pretty drastic to watch, our own comrades being killed. When we ran up to bring the casualties back, I saw a man sitting behind a house. He was holding his head with his hand as he'd been shot in the head. He died behind the house. They just had to leave him there. It was a sense of fear. There was widespread firing and noise within the village and soldiers dropping, and all the time there was the sound of rifle fire and eventually the gunfire. I remember there was quite strong smell of blood, dried blood. We were just frightened of what was going to happen next.
That must have been an absolutely horrific position to have been in.
Well, especially for territorial troops, this isn't really what they've signed up for. They're not frontline troops yet.
So these guys have not even seen action. They've not really been prepared for action. They haven't got the right equipment. They haven't got the right weapons. Like, for example, they were overloaded on tracer rounds, for example.
Yeah.
They're giving away their position. I would have been terrified in that position. What is happening? Why is everything burning around me? And the intense amount of gunfire. I'm assuming the German troops are far more well prepared.
Well, yeah, a good chunk of them have already seen action in Poland. So, and then you've also got sort of elite, not in this part, but you've got elite units like the mountain troops in Narvik and the paratroopers. These are the best trained troops in the German army. And so they're a bit more prepared for this, a bit more ready for this. And also for the territorials, the last thing you want to be doing is staring down the 2 Panzer IIs coming up the road, and all you've got is rifles. What can you do?
No, exactly. But reinforcements, I'm going to continue this now, only because you and I, Chris, can go off on a tangent, which is more likely us to do so. So let me get back on track, which is usually me telling you guys to get back on track. So reinforcements did arrive from the regular 15th Infantry Brigade, who landed at Andasnes on the 23rd of April. More or less, it's General Paget, who's landing on the 25th with air cover from the Fleet Air Arm, which are operating from the Ark Royal, and the Glorious, who had sailed close to the coast. Oh, hold on. I'm the one that gets to mention the boats today, Chris. Thank you for that. They also included 1 battalion from the Green Howards, King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, York and Lancasters, an anti-tank company, 55th Field Company of the Engineers, and the 146th West Riding Field Ambulance. So a frozen lake was turned into a makeshift airfield, and Gloucester Gladiator fighters of the 263 Squadron were flown off the Glorious. Clearly, that is also, a boat that Chris has made me talk about, and which used this as a base. They flew 183 miles through a snowstorm and only had 4 maps between them, which in itself is just insane, because I don't know what crazy insane person would decide that it's a smart choice to fly through a snowstorm, but here we are. They also then landed on the 24th of April. So the next day, the Luftwaffe attacked the airfield and several aircraft were destroyed on the ground. The mechanics who were all inexperienced which hopefully they do gain some experience from this, they ended up struggling to get the aircraft airborne in the difficult conditions, and it took an average of 90 minutes to refuel and rearm each aircraft, which is an incredible long time. Chris, how long does it normally take?
Um. Hmm. But by the Battle of Britain, I think they're able to do a whole squadron within about half an hour to an hour. Because to refuel them all takes a while, but 90 minutes per aircraft is a long, long time.
Exactly, which is the point. Which is the point that I wanted to make. Is that at this point, 90 minutes is a huge amount of time, and like you said, by the Battle of Britain, an hour to half an hour, which in itself is a lot of time saved. But the pilots did fly some 40 sorties and claimed 6 German aircraft, but the serviceability dropped to just 1 aircraft on the 26th of April. Their relief was the 263rd Squadron Hurricanes, which were cancelled, and the Gladiators were withdrawn on the 28th, which brings us to Kvam.
It does indeed. So on the 25th of April, the 1st Battalion of the Coily, King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, arrived by train at Kvam, where they found Norwegian and British troops that were still withdrawing from the previous actions, and of course the German advance at Ringbo. Kvam's a good place to stop the Germans. It's not only a choking point where the valley becomes a gorge, but there's also a large open area beyond which opens up to large fields, particularly for firing at your enemy. There's also a frozen lake, as we've just been talking about, which had an island with a hill on it that could be used to cover the road that ran parallel with the river. Now, the Allies would attempt to blow up the road south of Kvam in 3 places to halt the panzer thrust, but to no real avail, and the gladiators who arrived to give air support are quickly scattered. The Coily arrived, stripped off their great coats, and established positions quickly, with A and C companies being deployed to the Lagan Island west of the road, and B company would be deployed east of the road on the steep slopes. Now, between them, they had 2 mortars and 5 anti-tank guns, with 3 more in support. They had been assured by the Norwegians that they would hold south of Kvam until the evening of the 25th. It is also worth mentioning at this point that on top of the snow and ice, the conditions are twilight from 4:30 in the morning until about 10 p.m. when night finally does set in. Now at 7:30 a.m. on the 25th, the Norwegians would withdraw from Kvam, and at 11:50, Panzer II, supported by a light tank and armored car, would approach the British lines. Now, the tanks were disabled by the anti-tank rifles, and supporting infantry would also take casualties. Now, the Germans called in artillery support and mortars, and by noon, Brigadier Smith, the commanding officer, would be wounded and had to give command over to Lieutenant Colonel Kent Lemon. The Germans would press up the slope to the east and, of course, attack B Company, but the British would be able to repulse the attack. Now, the Germans would regroup and attack across the frozen lake to get at A Company, who were already somewhat decimated by the artillery fire that had happened. By mid-afternoon, they consisted of 4 officers and 85 men, and C Company would move forward to reinforce them. Now, at about 5:30 p.m., the 1st York and Lancasters arrived to help hold that left flank, but by nightfall, B Company, which was on the slopes, had withdrawn to Kvam and abandoned their anti-tank guns and heavy machine guns. Now, the British would have 189 casualties, the Germans 4 dead, but the advance had been paused. Which brings us to day 2 of the conflict.
It does, but before I move on to day 2, because clearly the guys have decided that because I've not done much talking over the past couple of episodes, I have to do more. But there's a point, Zane, that you made that I just want to talk amongst each other. And that is the twilight conditions from 4:30 a.m. until 10 p.m. That's just mind-blowing. That's insane.
It's a long time.
Yeah. It's not proper daylight, it's just half light. So it's going to make it gives you advantages in a way because it makes you harder to spot by the enemy, but it also means that you're spotting the enemy is going to be harder as well.
But wouldn't that also cause a psychological problem amongst the infantry and the land invasion? Because having, that amount of light for, God, that's more than 12 hours is, my maths is off, but, 16 hours, something like that. That's a lot of daylight for one session.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree that it would be, but I also would argue on one side to say that for the Norwegians, this is probably something they're used to doing. They're used to, because this type of these types of conditions and this type of twilight, I would imagine the Norwegians at least are pretty good with it. It's going to be the bigger question is more for the Germans and the British, particularly because again we're talking about, for the most part, territorials. So you just really don't know. But I think it's a good point to bring up.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think by Kvam though, the Coily and the Lanks and Yorks are regular troops, so they're a bit more tuned in and slightly better trained. So I think which is why the Germans start. This is why there's day two. They're actually dug in and know what they're doing and a bit more prepared.
Well, you kind of led me into it now, Chris. I might as well continue with day two. Because at 5:30 a.m., when clearly it's already an hour worth of daylight, I don't know if anybody can hear that in my voice, that at 5:30 a.m. there's clearly daylight. The Germans commence an artillery bombardment and machine guard bombardment of the Coley before launching infantry attacks at C Company of the York and Lancaster Regiment, but they were repelled again. By 9 a.m., the Germans keep probing the British, left moving up the slopes where they were repelled again by 3 Norwegian soldiers. As I'm telling you, by 3 Norwegian soldiers holding the Hilligan Setter farm. At 11 a.m., the attack started again, and the Luftwaffe join in now, because clearly you can't have an attack without the Luftwaffe joining in. They join in with artillery to strike the road and the village, and understandably, they managed to start getting through the British lines. Chris, sorry, quick question, because obviously this is not something that I've studied. Is this something that they would have learned during Guernica, so in Spain in 1936?
Yes, but no. Guernica was a test on terror bombing, which was one of Douai's theories from the 1920s, that you could defeat an enemy with just air power.
Okay, sorry. That was just a random thought there, because I thought that whole idea would have come from that, but it's fine. So then panzer attack happens at 1 p.m. Gosh, this is happening like every 2 hours. Something is happening. At 1 p.m. it begins, and the remains of B and C Company of the Coily attempted to repel them with 3 anti-tank rifles. However, their roadblock, which was made of trees, blocked their sights, which is not very helpful. Captain McGriggs ran out several times under fire to clear a gap in the roadblock so they could see the enemy, and eventually was wounded, but he managed to clear the line of sight for one of the guns. So again, we have this kind of issue of there is this problem with their sights being blocked, but also, like you said, when we're just talking about the daylight thing, it's easier for them to spot, gosh, I've gotten it the wrong way around now. It's harder for them to be spotted and harder for them to spot, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I'm on it. Corporal Stokes took out 2 tanks with 4 rounds from his anti-tank gun, leaving them ablaze at the side of the road before taking out a third with a single shot. And by the way, I think he's totally badass. He and his men then withdrew as the Germans attacked their position. By 4 p.m, the Germans are close to breaking the British left flank, despite the Yorks and Lancasters holding them, but a group of 40 Norwegian ski troops attack at long distance, causing the Germans to withdraw again. At 5 p.m, Page issues an order for Kvam to be abandoned by 11 p.m. for a new defensive line at Kvam, which is 4 to 5 kilometres north. An hour later, the Germans had control of the Lagan Island, and the German phosphorus artillery shells. Oh yeah, those phosphorus shells. Yeah, we know that during the Warsaw Uprising. Anyway, the German phosphorus artillery shells started forest fires in British positions, but they held out until the night withdrawal. I'm surprised that they didn't destroy and damage more people and more objectives with those bombs rather than just starting forest fires.
I think because when you're firing artillery into woods, they tend to hit the trees before they hit the guys on the ground. So they're hitting the trees and setting them on fire, but the guys on the ground have a bit more cover.
They're lucky. They're very lucky
Yeah.
because, as I don't know if anybody's listened to our Warsaw Uprising one, but phosphorus basically makes the skin burn, and no amount of liquid, no amount of help, it's going to continue burning. So you could jump into a swimming pool and you're going to continue burning in the swimming pool. So
You've got to
for
cut it
me,
out.
well, exactly. And this is it's horrific, especially if your whole body is covered. You're never going to survive it. Right. So just to finish this bit off, so the British lost 54 soldiers and 3 Norwegian soldiers, and 3 civilians were also killed during the artillery bombing. 1 civilian was Danish, Sorensen, who went to help the farm animals in a burning farm. I mean, that's really sad. Sorry, that's kind of hit me a little bit talking about that, because all he's trying to do is help the animals, and then he just gets killed, and he's found next day by the railway with 3 bullets in his head. The other is a 70-year-old Mari Bakken, who was found the day after she went to get some supplies from her abandoned house with a shot through her heart. And 70 buildings in Kvam, including the church, were destroyed, and the village pretty much completely decimated, leaving the civilians homeless and with absolutely nothing.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal.
It's grim. It's really grim.
I just had, when I read about those 2 deaths, question marks suddenly popped up. 3 bullet holes in the head. That's,
yeah, exactly. Where the heck did that come from?
It sounds a bit execution-y.
It's sus.
I obviously I don't want to make any allegations, but the cause of death, 1 shot to the heart, 3 shots to the head. Question marks were raised.
That
I don't know.
I don't understand that either. I mean, all the man wanted to do was to go and save the animals. Can't you just leave him in peace to do that?
Yeah.
Sorry, which now brings us quite nicely to Chris, who hasn't done that much talking about Narvik.
Yeah, I felt that we should really mention Narvik in the Narvik podcast. To be honest, at the moment for the British, although it's something that needs to be sort of contained and deal with Dietl's mountain troops, the main concern is the German thrust. If you can stop the force upward, you can isolate Trondheim, and then you can talk about mopping up elsewhere. So Narvik is a bit of a sideshow for the moment. It's still pretty bleak. The Norwegian 5th Divisional Commander has refused to resist the Germans and is being replaced. Colonel Sudlow, who is a far-right supporter, also refuses to fight the Germans. The garrison of Narvik had 200 troops who managed to escape. They withdrew to hold the vital railway between Sweden and Norway, but they get surprised and taken by the Germans. So the Germans get the railway, which means they can get supplies in from neutral Sweden. They've also captured the Norwegian camp at Gratingsborten. They attacked that and captured that without a problem. Further German reinforcements have come up. The elite Hermann Göring Fallschirmjäger, who you may remember from the Battle of Donbass, they've sent up troops to take Bodo, which is another port, and that should relieve the pressure on Narvik, because it will then split the British to look in 2 different ways. And as mentioned, the Fallschirmjäger are some of the best troops in the German military. The British are at Harsted. They brought in 3 battalions of troops and deployed them at Schjavingen and Bogen, and they will be reinforced on the 28th of April by the French Expeditionary Force under General Antoine Bethouard, and it consists of 3 battalions of mountain troops and 2 battalions of the Foreign Legion, and they're going to be they're deployed in the north and to the south of Oftfjord, and the next group of troops that are going to turn up on the 4th of May might come from a certain Eastern European country that we keep talking about. But so yeah, if that's coming up in a future episode, so do stay tuned for that. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do consider dropping us a like, comment, stars, or whatever's on your preferred podcasting platform. If you're really enjoying our work and you want to hear more, including discussions on deeper dives into weaponry or battles, Star Wars, Babylon 5's coming up, then do feel free to head over to our Patreon, where you can sign up for a reasonable amount of money a month, and for all this extra bonus footage. But as always, thanks from me, and thanks from the guys.